Hi guys, and welcome to day 3 of my 7-day Loose Floral challenge. This is a free 7-day challenge teaching you everything you need to know about painting loose florals in watercolor. There'll be a new video every day on my YouTube channel, and you can paint along with me or you can go at your own pace. There's also a free Facebook group where you can share your work with other people who are doing the challenge. So, yesterday we did an anemone flower, today we'll be looking at a rose. Now I know how much you guys love painting roses. You're always asking me for rose tutorials. It's one of the most common requests. So I'm so excited to paint this with you today. Now some people who are painting loose florals try and stay away from roses because they're quite daunting. They have quite a lot of petals and detail and it can seem a little bit overwhelming to paint all of that. But today I'm going to show you a really neat trick to just simplify it back down to some basic brush strokes. So in day 3 we're going to be building on some techniques that we learned in the first 2 days and learning some new things as well. First up, we're going to be looking at using white space to create separation and breathing space between the petals. We'll also be looking at how to use value and contrast in the painting to create interest. So we're going to use very dark and very light mixtures of paint. And then finally, we're going to be looking at some tips for creating leaves as well. All right, let's get painting. So now we're ready to start painting. Once again, the supplies are the same. So Legion Stonehenge Aqua cold press paper, 100% cotton, Winsor & Newton professional paints, and Princeton Heritage 4050 round brushes. I'm going to be using a size 8 for this one. So for day 3, we are going to be looking at roses. So this is going to be focusing on using contrast and white space to create separation between the petals so that we don't end up with a kind of mass blob of colour. One of the things that's really important when you're painting loose is to make sure that you've got definition and white space between the petals so it doesn't all just become one mess where everything is blending together. So a really great example for this is roses because they have such complicated dense petals. What we're going to really focus on is painting a rose, only looking at which of the tops of the petals we can see rather than worrying about getting all the details in there. So for this I'm going to be using this Winsor red, which is a nice cool red and one of my favourite colours to use. And we're going to vary it up with some different yellows to create a peach colour as we go out. So I'm going to mix this up and a little bit of cadmium yellow perhaps to make a peach. So we're going to start with a pure-ish Winsor red. So you want this concentrated on the tip of your brush, and what we're going to do is create small C strokes for the centre in the darkest value. So what I'm going to do is touch that to a kitchen towel to take some of the water off. Now we're going to start here and create a few small C strokes. So you can see that we are just creating small curved lines that connect like that. And we don't want any that are too separate like that, so we're going to connect them to other things. The idea is that they all touch each other, and that's important for the wet on wet to work. So that's going to be the centre of our rose. Now what we're going to do is get a lighter, more orangey value. So a lighter colour mix and a bit more water, and then press thicker lines for some more petals. Okay, you can see that we're leaving white gaps in between these. We're touching the petals together at the edges, but then the full body of them is not touching. And I'm just going to gradually allow that to touch there and bleed. You can see we've still got some white space here. And it's really important. If we didn't, all of this would connect and just become a big colourful blob. And we're going to rinse that off and go a bit lighter, maybe add a bit more yellow. Now the strokes are getting longer and thicker as we go around, but where we're touching there, it's creating a lovely bleed. And then another one here. And then we're going to connect it there. Can you see how this is getting lighter and wider as we go out? And what I'm doing is now going back in with a bit of red, adding some contrast in there. You can also use thinner strokes to fill in any gaps. And again, more water, lighter stroke. You can also see what I'm trying to do is where we've got two petals joining here, I'm trying to add another one that kind of covers that join so we don't end up with layers of petals joining in the same place. So two petals that are separate there, so we're going to cover that gap with another petal and just tuck the little edges in to meet there. And again, we've got a bit of a gap there, so I'm just going to cover that with one. And then one final one here. So what we're essentially doing is creating rings of petals that increase in size and thickness and decrease in saturation and value. Now what you can do while this is still wet is go back in with a slightly darker value and drop it in some places and allow it to spread. And this just helps with the contrast. Making sure that you don't close up your white space there. There you go. If you get any that look a bit dark, you can always go back in with your brush and just smooth that out. And then what we want is to create a really, really light value with lots of water and then just adjust the shape with some thinner strokes. So we're aiming for something that's kind of balanced and round and not too perfect. So I'm just going to go around just connecting the sections there to adjust the shape slightly with some thin lines. Okay, I'm going to add a little bit more yellow in some places where it's starting to look a bit peachy. And then you can use a bit of water to spread it around. I actually quite like to put darker value on some of the edges. All right, I like the way that that's blending. Got some good colour mixes going on. I think that's a little patchy. I'm just going to smooth that out with some water. But we've got a really good contrast from the very dark, thin centres all the way out, but we've got this consistent white space throughout that is making sure that we don't end up with any blobs, and you can see that they are clearly defined petals. Okay, now we're happy with this rose shape. What we're going to do is put the stem and leaves in. So for this, we're going to go back to the sap green, which is a nice medium green. We're also going to come back to the cadmium yellow as well for a bit of interest in the leaves later on. So first things first is the stem. So as before, we're going to pull out from the center, and then I'm going to create a kind of angle. So roses have like bent stems with slight angles in them, corners if you like. There we go. And then we're going to pull a stem out for the leaves at the bend. And then we're going to do the leaves with the same technique we did yesterday, but try dropping other colours in there. So we'll pull that first one up, do a bit of a lighter value there. You can see I'm trying to just create some angles in the stems. You can also allow these to touch the flower there, so allow the colours to blend a little bit. And then we're going to pick up some of the cadmium yellow. You only want a little bit because it's quite a bold colour, and touch it into some of the leaves for a bit of interest. That's a bit too yellow. Add some more sap green to that one. You can see that I'm pulling some of these down. I'm going to lighten the value of that one so that it can touch its neighbour. And then we're going to go back with the yellow and just drop that in different places. Now, another thing that we're going to look at today is crossing your leaves and your stems. So it looks really false when you create all these perfect leaves and they don't kind of cross over with anything. So what we're going to do is cross one over the stem here, because they do grow quite randomly in nature, and it helps to make the painting look a lot more professional. So then we're going to pull another stem out here and then curve it down back to our sap green. I'm going to touch that there and allow it to run down the stem as well. I really like how that looks. You can see that I'm not worried about creating perfect edges in these. I quite like when they have little wiggly edges. Rose leaves are certainly very irregular shapes. So one of the other things that you can kind of focus on in this lesson is really simplifying the shape of the flower and its leaves. So this isn't what a rose would look like if you looked at a photograph of it, but what we're doing is just taking almost the top parts of where the petals curve over and just focusing on creating those shapes rather than kind of faithfully recreating all the details from nature. That's what makes this style so loose, that we're working while everything's quite wet and we're not worrying about it being perfect or realistic or lifelike. It's not supposed to look like a photograph. It's an artistic impression of a rose rather than, you know, an actual rose. I'm just going to pull that round across the stem there and then pull the other side up there. Then we're going to add a darker value. You can also run back over some of the stems if you think they look a bit too light. All right, I'm happy with that. I like how that looks. That started a really beautiful bleed there. What I will say, if you're doing this 7-day challenge with me, is that it does help to have cotton paper. I know it's more expensive, but it stays wet for so much longer and it allows you to create effects like that. If you're painting this on kind of cheaper wood pulp paper, the kind of cellulose paper, what would happen is that would dry off much quicker and then you just wouldn't get that blend. So it does help to invest if you're kind of wanting to work in this style. All right, I think that's the rose done. All right then, that's day 3 finished. So to recap, today we've looked at using white space to create separation in the petals. We've looked at using contrast with very dark centers and lighter petals around the edge. And we've also looked at some tips for painting leaves as well. Please don't forget to share your work in the Facebook group. We'd all love to see what you're creating. And come back tomorrow for day 4.